BW, tell me someone within your immediate family who made an impact on you, was a role model, and what specifically was that main trait you got from them? Briefly. And then the second part is outside your immediate family. So you get what I'm searching for.
The primary influences in I know that shaped me. This would be part of the memoir that I would like to write, going back to the seed from the tree or the flower. Would of course be my mother, the musician, the one who sang to us, who loved to talk to me about Glenn Gould, and we would argue at a very early age because I was introduced to music and performance through her, and her marvelous, indelible influence of the creative life that was thwarted in her to a great extent. She was part of that World War II generation where they simply she did not have the free associative power to, or didn't think she could do those things. And then, of course, my father, who was a politician, worked for Lester Pearson, Saint Laurent, Lester Pearson, and John Turner, Canadian prime ministers. And so there was a kind of initiation into political consciousness and great liberal traditions which existed at that time and are in danger of being shattered or destroyed or stretched by the magnetism. You know, when I speak about liberalism, everyone thinks you're thinking about neoliberalism, which is really another word for conservative economics. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the great tradition of the enlightened middle, as it were. And that's part of the legacy of my father, who was also a writer, and we always talked about books. Also, my uncles, who were Holocaust survivors. They were part of the Kindertransport. Both of them were saved by a man named Schindler, who I think is, sorry, not Schindler, Nicky Winton, that he was like Schindler. He foresaw what was going to come. So this legacy of suffering, of affliction that came from members of the family who lost all their family in the Holocaust and gratefully grew up in North America and in our small circle of family, brought that process and presence and aching memory of suffering, pain, and loss, so that we were raised with a powerful, my sister and I, with a powerful sense of the solidarity of the communion with suffering, that people had lost much. My father was also a soldier at a very early age. He ran away from home at 17 to join the army and was sent home, and then had to, when they found out how old he was, and then he went back at 18 and ended up in Europe. My uncles were kind and generous people who had a surface of cynicism about the world, but underneath it were devoted and loving and told us. And I would never have understood what the Holocaust and what European Jews went through if it had not been for the legacy of their witnessing and of their companionship with us and if I may tell a quick story there, if you don't mind, I love stories. My uncle Joe lived in Paris for many years as a journalist, reporter for the CBC News. And he'd like to phone me up when I was a teenager and say, if you can pay your own way over, you can come and live in Paris with us for a while. So, of course, I found my way to do so. And once when I was quite young, he said, when I was there with him, he said, would you like to go and meet Jean-Paul Sartre? And Sartre, for me at that time, you know, at 16, 17, he was the idea of the writer, the engaged writer, the witness, the one who wrote in almost every genre except for poetry, in every form. You know, the figure that could be spectacularly wrong, but it didn't matter because he was engaged with his time and place, and could be spectacularly illuminating in his fiction and dramas. And you know, so I said, yes, let's go. So off we went to the cafe where he was, where there was a famous cafe where he and Simone de Beauvoir would sit and have their morning coffee and brandy and croissant and write. And there was Sartre across the street, across the boulevard, with his patch over his eye, writing away in a blue notebook with a brandy and a coffee and a croissant. What a great way to start the morning. And my uncle said, would you like to go and meet him? And I froze. I couldn't move. I was too much in awe. Here was one of the great figures of the time. I don't know where Simone de Beauvoir was, but that was the other question. Where is she? And so I didn't go. And my uncle, who was bold and a courageous soul who survived all the experiences to become a globetrotting journalist, pushed me to go and meet Sartre. And I couldn't. I couldn't do it. So we went off together, and my uncle had a brandy and coffee and croissant, and I had a cup of tea. And years later, the conclusion to the story is this. Years later, I went back to Paris, actually not so long ago, on my own, and went to see that place, that cafe. And there was the chair with a little plaque on it saying, Sartre wrote here. So I went over, sat in the chair, ordered myself a tea and a croissant because I don't drink. I didn't bring the brandy. I didn't order the brandy. And I began to write. I came home and went to visit my uncle who was dying at the time. And I sat with him and I told him that story, that I had sat in Sartre's chair and wrote for the day. My uncle reached across the bed, touched my hand, and said, BW, there's been some progress.